Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Happy Friday. Today is April 5th and we're going to be talking a lot of hoops today. Big weekend in college basketball, of course, with the Final Fours set to tip off, both in the men's and women's games. So we'll be more fixating on the men's game, the men's side of it, but if we have some time, maybe we talk a little bit about the women's game as well. We also have a big storyline that broke out earlier today that Bronny James, LeBron James's oldest son, has both entered into the transfer portal and the NBA draft. We'll discuss the ramifications of this, what I expect him to do from here on out. We're going to be getting into the NBA action from last night. And then finally, we're going to also wrap up a little bit the Stephon Diggs saga. He was, of course, traded on Wednesday to the Houston Texans from the Bills. And there are some details that have come out in the past 24 hours that I want to give an update on. So we will be getting into all of that. But just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with the show. Helps us out a lot. Helps grow this channel. And for any of our live viewers, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Helps get your comments the priority they deserve and make this show as interactive as possible using the live chat. On that note, though, getting into our first segment of the day, we're going to be talking about the Final Four. Now, again, fixating on the men's side of this. If we have some time, though, we will dive into the women's game a little bit as well. If any of our live viewers have questions, definitely drop them in the chat. But the Final Four on the men's side is tipping off in Phoenix, Arizona on Saturday night. And the teams just traveled out there. We already have a little bit of a subplot, a minor story that has come out with the reigning national champions in UConn by the fact that their flight was originally scheduled to head out on Wednesday night. But because of some malfunctions with the plane itself, they were delayed 7.5 hours. So they ended up not arriving in Arizona until much later than they were initially planning for. They ended up landing yesterday morning at 3:14 local time. To them coming from the East Coast, felt like 5:14 body time. So definitely an inconvenience. Shouldn't have any effect on Saturday's game, of course. Now they have all these types of media availabilities and such that they have to put up with over the next couple days, but ultimately I don't think that it is going to have any sort of a real effect on their tournament game itself, other than the fact that if you keep up with college basketball and you know anything about UConn's head coach, Dan Hurley, this is going to be yet another thing that he sort of spins in the us versus the world commentary that time and time again, he has almost the Michael Jordan mindset of just internalizing any type of obstacle, inconvenience, and using it as motivation. Was very vocal about that when the brackets were released a few weeks ago, when he saw the type of region that UConn was slated into, which in his defense was definitely the toughest of the bunch, did not stop UConn from dominating their way into the Final Four to get where they are. Also, sort of as we're talking about Dan Hurley here and his internalization of these types of different factors, it was just announced within the past half hour that Houston's Kelvin Sampson was named the AP Coach of the Year, beat out Dan Hurley by 2 votes. I'm sure for Hurley, ultimately, I think he cares much, much more about winning the national championship than he has care for this Coach of the Year award. But again, just knowing the type of personality he is, I don't want to call it pettiness because I don't think that that's necessarily it. I just feel like it's having that chip on your shoulder, the little bit of the edge that just separates the ultra competitors from anybody else. And that's what we've seen from Dan Hurley over his early tenure here in UConn. And even if you go back and hear some of the stories from his pre-UConn days, seems like that is the type of man that he is. But, just wanted to briefly address that at least. But as for the matchups themselves, we have Alabama versus UConn and NC State versus Purdue. Before we get into predictions on those games, there were a couple other things I just sort of wanted to run through. And in this new age of name, image, and likeness, and the transfer portal, all this player movement, you can call it player empowerment if you'd like in the college game, I found it very interesting that I looked at a ranking that CBS Sports put out in terms of ranking the starters of each of the Final Four teams. And what stuck out to me was the fact that 12 out of 20 of the starters in the Final Four are transfers, including 6 of the top 10 players that were ranked in this CBS list. Out of this group, it was notable that Purdue is the most homegrown program left. 4 out of their 5 starters were initially recruited to Purdue. Lance Jones is the only transfer in their starting lineup. And then if you want to look on the other side of the spectrum, I believe every single NC State starter is a transfer at some point. Fact check me if I'm wrong on that, but both of the DJs are. Mohamed Diarra is for sure. And then it comes down to the others in McConnell, but I'm pretty sure that every single one of them is a transfer, which, is just something very notable in my eyes when you look at sort of what it takes to be a dominant program and, even dominant, just to be a relevant program in today's college sports world. Really, this stretches not just basketball, but football as well. A lot of people point to the fact that if you want to make that sort of cross-sport reference, in that Clemson has sort of seen the level of success deteriorate over the past few years, and in large part it's due to the fact that Dabo Swinney is, not very... He doesn't really utilize the transfer portal like some of these other major programs do. He believes more so in the homegrown talent there. And again, you can debate it all you'd like. I'm just saying the results would tell you, as of late at least, that you do have to sort of take advantage of this transfer portal. And that's what the teams that have made it to this point have done so far. But one other quick trend that I wanted to hit on is out of the 20 starters from the Final Four, only one of them is a freshman. This is something that I wouldn't say is necessarily a recent trend per se. We've known that a lot of the time, especially in the past decade or so, that it's really hard to strictly ride freshman talent all the way through this tournament where it's the biggest possible stage. And a lot of the time you need more experience to help be, the real catalyst of your postseason run. And that is also something that sort of stuck out to me when looking at the teams remaining. Stephon Castle being the only freshman starter left in the big dance. He, of course, the guard from UConn. He's had his ups and downs this season. The talent's clearly there, but he was a 5-star guy coming into college, and to some degree he's lived up to that level of expectations. Again, inconsistencies have been a little bit detrimental at times, but who am I to say detrimental, because UConn has been the most dominant team in the country this season. So, just some things that I thought were notable when looking at the overall pool that is remaining. And then I also just wanted to sort of look at the 4 teams remaining and look at what is the biggest individual team's storyline. And I do think it has to be Purdue and their redemption arc here. They were, of course, upset by Fairleigh Dickinson, the 16-seeded team that took them down in the round of 64 last year. It was Purdue's 3rd straight loss to a double-digit seeded team. They had been upset in the round of 64 2 of the last 3 years, and now they are back to the Final Four for the program's first time since 1980. They have, technically unofficial, but they are going to have the 2-time Naismith Player of the Year award winner in Zach Edey. He's just about a lock to get it this upcoming year as well. He is the reigning Naismith Player of the Year as well. So this turnaround here for Matt Painter and the Boilermakers to get back to this spot, everybody, including myself, I didn't think that they were necessarily, round 1 eligible to be upset, but I didn't have necessarily the confidence levels that I did in UConn or Houston for that matter. And here they are in this position while Houston is at home. Just saying, Jamal Shead never got injured. Maybe a different story for the Cougars, but that is not the point. I think that you look at Purdue here and you have to give them tons of credit for being able to make it back to this spot. We heard Zach Edey talking about how there isn't a level of pressure or anything, but it was clear there was real pressure on Matt Painter, on Edey to be able to pull this off. I mean, you think Edey's going to be headed to the NBA. Painter's going to be able to stick around in college basketball for a while still. Obviously, without Edey, the level of success may dip a little bit, but Edey may have been one of the most sort of forgotten great college basketball talents if they were never able to put together a real run. The furthest they had made it up to this point in Edey's career had been the Sweet 16 when they lost to St. Peter's. So this is definitely a big deal for him. For whatever you want to talk about legacy, I know that sometimes that conversation can be quite the headache, but really helped to solidify the collegiate career of Zach Edey and how, in this time, like I just talked about in terms of transfers and the lack of real consistency in terms of where players are, which also sort of leads to the lack of star power. You look at the women's game and there are a lot more notable, homegrown talents and a lot of bigger names. The men's side doesn't necessarily have that same level of marketability with their stars because they don't have the star power the same way. And Zach Edey, I know that he's not super outspoken. He doesn't play necessarily the flashiest game or anything, but he is an incredible player. It goes beyond just being how tall he is. He is legitimately skilled, especially on that offensive side of the ball. What he'll pan out to be in the NBA is definitely a little bit of an uncertainty, but for his college career, he really is one of the most notable big men of, I'm going to say, at least recent history. But if I have to go into a deep dive and sort of look at the big picture, I'm sure you can make a larger point for him as well. And he did it by sticking with the program in Purdue that it seemed like things were getting tough at multiple points with some of these upsetting losses, but he stuck with it, and now it's paying off with them being in the Final Four, so you have to give him credit for that, and Matt Painter as well for being able to not just retain him, but it's the others on the team as well, and maybe some of the younger guys, but Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, all younger players that didn't get discouraged after frankly, an embarrassing loss last year to Fairleigh Dickinson in the tournament. And now they're all back. They're better players than they were last year. And they have real potential to make the finals and win it all. So on that note, sort of giving out some picks here, I do want to look at the spreads actually as I speak this over, because just getting ahead of it, I'm going to be taking UConn and Purdue this weekend. Now, I think that it would be arrogant to say there's no chance that we could see upsets on either end. As much as I just spoke up Purdue, if I were going to pick an upset, it would be NC State over Purdue. I mean, the big man matchup, of course, between Zach Edey and DJ Burns is going to be the big time headlines and everything along those lines, but the rest of the guards for NC State as well, I do believe are very talented players in having the likes of DJ Horn and Michael O'Connell, that have been the level of players that they have. O'Connell, I don't know where I just got McConnell, but I think that could be a solid matchup. That being said, the spread as it currently stands on ESPN Bet is 9.5. UConn is 11.5. So I think I would probably side with both of the favorites in terms of the spreads here. Again, NC State, if they made things close, I wouldn't be surprised. But you look at the fact that Purdue was tested as much as they were against a team like Tennessee last week, and they ended up winning that game by 6. It was by far the closest game they've played in some time here since the Big Ten tournament, at least when they ended up losing. But Tennessee is a much better team than NC State in my eyes. As much as I love NC State, go Wolfpack. I'm sure that a lot of America is rooting for them in this upcoming game. Fact of the matter is, we do have to remember that this is not an NC State team that was going to even make the tournament. And I'm sure, remember it, everybody's been talking about the fact that NC State was not going to make the tournament if it weren't for that miraculous run that they pulled off in the ACC tournament. But Purdue, I think, is just on another level, and I think they're on that same level with UConn, where, I guess sort of shifting into that game quickly, I've been picking against Alabama for most of the tournament. I believe I ended up, on the show at least, picking them over Clemson, but just about outside of that, I said that they were in potential danger in just about every game, and they've continued to prove me wrong up to this point. That offense is absolutely lethal, and you have to give them, their flowers for being able to rely so heavily on that offense and just game after game being elite. Not just that, but other than the Grand Canyon game that they played, be able to sort of drag others into this fast-paced three-point shootout game. I think that UConn is too well coached, too disciplined, and too good on both sides of the floor to, really let Alabama dictate this game. Now we'll see. I've been wrong about Alabama just about all tournament, so maybe I'm going to be wrong in this instance as well. But spread is 11.5. I do think that they cover that. Going back to last tournament, they haven't lost a game. They haven't won a game by less than 13 points. So when you look at it from that perspective, that alone would say that UConn should be favored by a little bit more than 11.5. But we will see. And then whatever our finals matchup is, or our championship game matchup, I should say, is on Monday. We will dive more into that in depth on our show on Monday. But I think that Purdue versus UConn could be absolute cinema. Just about anything that we could have asked for in terms of being college basketball fans, and seeing that matchup would be another great matchup between Klingon and Zach Edey in terms of another great big man matchup. I mean, if Purdue were to move on to play Alabama, I think there's a 0% chance they would be able to stop Zach Edey, and that would be a stomping. But UConn-Purdue would be a fascinating matchup. Again, it's been the two of them, along with Houston as well, all season long, and to have them be here in the biggest possible stage would be a gift to college basketball fans. So, hope everybody enjoys those games. If you're betting on the games, hope your bets hit. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the news about Bronny James. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that clown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking the Final Four matchups that are ahead in this weekend to come. Now we're going to be diving into the news that broke this morning about Bronny James declaring for the NBA draft. Bronny, of course the son of LeBron James, just finished up his freshman season at USC, and for the most part, it was a little bit quiet, a little bit underwhelming, not just from a personal standpoint of he himself, but the Trojans were massively disappointing in this year. Bronny ended up averaging 4.8 points per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, and 2.1 assists per game. He struggled with efficiency from the floor, while at times he showed good mechanics in some of his perimeter shooting, specifically the mid-range as well. At times looked nice for him. He finished the season on 37-27% shooting splits, so not great. He obviously had a very weird startup to the season where he went into cardiac arrest during a practice in late August, which forced him to miss the final weeks of training camp, and even the first 9 games of the regular season. Was a very scary situation at the time. He made his way back to the court, and again, he was fine. He showed some flashes, but I do think as an NBA prospect, he still is very raw. He seems like he is a good decision maker, but when he was playing at USC, he was just very timid. Didn't seem like he was playing with loads of conviction. Now, hard worker on defense for sure. There were times where USC would use him to pick up ball carriers on the other side of the court, ball handlers, I should say, on the other end of the court, and give them little full press court looks to slow down the opposing team's offenses. I just didn't think on offense he was very aggressive, which is pretty understandable considering the fact that he sort of came into the season later and he was playing with a handful of upperclassmen on that USC team And even if you look at the freshman talent that was on the roster, Isaiah Collier was the real headliner, a potential lottery pick this year. He also dealt with injuries during the season as well that just led to, all in all, just a very disappointing year for USC. But rumors came out about Bronny entering the transfer portal a couple days ago. This wasn't confirmed until today. So, yes, he declares for the NBA draft, but also put his name in the transfer portal, meaning that he has a bunch of different options to sort of weigh in the coming weeks, where he has until May to decide whether or not he wants to stick with the draft process. One thing or another, he's likely not going to be back at USC. They just made a coaching change. We'll get more into that as well. But in terms of his draft prospect, I don't think that there's all that much hope for him. Now, multiple experts have removed him entirely from their 2024 mock drafts, and even if he was to be drafted, it would be likely a late second rounder. He could absolutely still look to try and develop on an NBA roster, maybe even a G League roster, if that's the route that he wants to go, that he's fed up with college itself. But to some degree, at least, he would be getting his chance. Yes, he has some sort of potential, but the biggest reason people think that, to a lot of degrees, is the fact that he is LeBron James's son. And I don't want to fully pin it on nepotism by any means, because like I said, I did think that there were real flashes in terms of being a quality, as of right now, a quality role player. Now we'll see if he can sort of develop himself to a higher level, but again, a smart player and everything, but in terms of that high level scoring or passing, or really, I mean, he's a talented defender. It's not like he has tremendous size at this moment, though. He's, of course, though, LeBron James's son. So, there's a very real chance that he still can develop into the type of, maybe not quite the level of LeBron physically, but also I don't see any reason why not in reality. Doesn't have the height at the moment right now, but we'll see with all of that. But Bronny has clearly said that he wants to make a name for himself, which is obviously a little bit difficult when you are practically named LeBron James Jr. and your father is one of the top two players, if not the top player in NBA history. I've been saying I think that Bronny would really benefit from staying another year in college. I think that he just isn't very refined at the moment, and the best way to refine his skills is to get actual playing time. Doing so in college, I believe, would be the best path for him. Now, maybe he could do it in the G League, but again, while he's still physically developing, I feel like it would not hurt him whatsoever to, play against, I wouldn't even say it's lower competition. I mean, G League, they're professional athletes. They're NBA players. And I just feel like he can sort of work his way into that with another sophomore year in college. But I'm definitely not trying to be, too negative on a 19-year-old. Like, there's no sort of animosity coming out here. I just feel like we have to evaluate him as an actual NBA prospect because of the fact that that's what he is. Nothing's given necessarily in the NBA, and I just don't think he's ready for the leap yet. But if he does go back to college, like I mentioned, it's likely not going to be with USC. He posted on social media thanking USC for the time that he spent there, so it doesn't seem like he's necessarily... He's signaling already that he is not going to be back at USC. That's outside of the fact that all of these signs really to put your name in the draft pool and the transfer portal means that he is considering all of his options, and the fact that they just went through a coaching change at USC probably helps to solidify his decision to not return there. Andy Enfield was the one that recruited him, but he stepped away from USC. He's now with SMU. The school then hired Eric Musselman to be his replacement. I'm actually a big fan of Musselman, the Muss Bus. He spent the last half decade with Arkansas, brought them to multiple Elite Eights, but now it doesn't seem like he's going to go there. So assuming he sticks with college, where could he possibly land? The number one place that is being rumored is Duquesne. Keith Dambra, the head coach of the Dukes for the past couple decades, just led Duquesne to their first NCAA tournament appearance since 1977, and they upset BYU to win their first tournament game since 1969, but he just retired. The reason I bring up his name specifically is because he was the former head coach of LeBron James at St. Vincent St. Mary when he was in high school. So there's a level of relationship there, and they now named Dambrot's lead assistant, Drew Joyce, to be the school's next head coach. Who is Joyce? Well, he was on that same team at St. Vincent St. Mary along with LeBron as a player during those years. So the personal relationship between LeBron and Joyce is really the main catalyst for these rumors. Seems like there would absolutely be a chance for Bronny to get playing time, to get looks, and I feel like there's maybe a level of difference in a good way for Bronny, where just in a power conference with a lot more upperclassmen experience, he could go to Duquesne, who has received more buzz than they ever have because of their big win against BYU in the tournament this year. They play in the Atlantic 10, so not a power conference, but still a very solid conference as well. We see them get at large bids just about every year. I believe Dayton is in the Atlantic 10, and they got it this season. So they could be building something there, and Bronny could be a big-time part of that and have a role for himself at Duquesne that he did not have at USC, or if he were to try and look to go to any sort of a power conference school. So that's sort of been the popular front runner up to this point. There are other possibilities as well. I mentioned how Andy Enfield, the coach that recruited him to USC, is on his way to SMU. Not sure exactly the specifics of the type of relationship Enfield and Bronny had. I mean, Bronny got just under 20 minutes per game, who stuck with them all throughout the season. There was a brief stretch in February where Bronny was going through a little bit of a shooting slump, and Enfield sort of dipped down on Bronny's minutes for a bit there. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it seems like the two have a solid relationship, so it is a possibility. And then another name that's been thrown out there, again, just sort of sticking, at least for today, I suppose, with the theme of these personal relationships, that Oregon has been rumored in large part due to the fact that they are this big-time Nike school. Obviously, LeBron James being pretty much the number one ambassador of Nike these past handful of years, and Oregon has a lot of talent that is headed out the door. Jermaine Couisnard and N'Faly Dante, they're two stars from the tournament this year. They're both seniors and going to be headed out. What did we see from Oregon this year? They really struggled with having any sort of additional depth with that. Head coach Dana Altman has utilized the transfer portal in the past, so this wouldn't be any sort of a foreign concept for him necessarily, and just going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Again, I'm naming all these college teams. There's a chance that he might not come back to college, which I can't say I think it would be a full-on mistake, but I definitely, from whatever position I have necessarily, I think that he would be benefited from coming back from another year. And I think it would be awesome if we could see, college basketball get a good Bronny James season, as the sport has sort of struggled in the past couple of years with having true legitimate stars in the sport. So maybe it's selfish of me, I don't know, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And we are going to be taking our second break of the show. When we come back on the other end, we're going to be sticking with hoops for one more segment, talking about the NBA games from last night. So stick with us and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about the idea of Bronny entering the NBA draft and transfer portal. And now, on the note of the NBA, we're going to be getting into some of the games from last night. The one that I want to start with is the one between the Miami Heat and Philadelphia 76ers, where two teams here sitting as the 7 and 8 seeds in the Eastern Conference, both trying to make a little bit of a push here towards the end of the season, trying to escape the play-in threshold. As things currently stand, Indiana holds the 6th seed currently. And as I briefly check here, Indy's got a half-game lead on the Heat, a 1-game lead on the 76ers, so it is still in the realm of possibility through these last handful of games that they could work their way out. And really, I want to talk about, we're going to get into Joel Embiid in his second game back, but as far as this game in particular, very back and forth throughout. Sixers came out hot, but the Heat just kept it in reach for the entire game, and they went on a 13-0 run from the end of the third quarter into the early fourth, where they took the lead. And then from there, sort of the big picture issue with the Heat is their offense can just get so stagnant. They went from 8:19 left in the fourth quarter until there were 45 seconds left in the game to hit a field goal. It came off of a very tough shot as well of Terry Rozier hitting a step back fading three. So offense was just not easy for Miami in this game. And runs like this are why I do still refuse to believe the narrative that the Heat are better without Tyler Hero. I know that his stock has been all over the place since coming into the league, but he is, at the bare minimum, somebody who can create a shot for himself. And that's just something that the Heat are missing, as their offense has been really struggling, especially as of late. And, the Heat yesterday closed out this game with the likes of Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin down the stretch, who are both two very solid players. Not that I want to get on their case necessarily, especially because as a Celtics fan, especially with Caleb Martin, I know that I know of the damage that he can do, but just not players that are really going to initiate offense whatsoever. And it's very reliant on Terry Rozier, who has been playing very well as of late too. Somebody that definitely can be scary in the playoffs. It also comes down to the conversation around Jimmy Butler, where obviously we know playoff Jimmy, when he comes alive, he puts on his superhero cape and he takes over. But are we sure that Jimmy Butler is still at that same level of athleticism? And I say this, and I know that it could very easily come back to hurt me, that, this could be held over me. But ultimately with Jimmy here, we've seen he's 34 years old now, and he's been playing pretty much less and less games over the year. And you know what? He doesn't care about the regular season. He never has, which, to some degree, all power to him, because he shows up in the postseason. But in order to pull off these types of upsets that it took from last season at least, he's going to need to hit a level that we haven't seen from him in just about a year now. And I just feel like it is sort of a big ask to put it all on him. Now, like I mentioned, Tyler Hero maybe adds a level of dynamicism to their offense. Is dynamicism a word? Whatever, though. But he adds an element to their game that they currently don't have. A lot of the times when their offense was really getting going during this game against Philly, it came off of big-time defensive plays. It was during the second quarter, I believe, where they were throwing some full-court pressure, causing the Sixers to turn the ball over, and they were getting themselves a bunch of easy looks in this game. But I thought it was a real concern for the Heat, who, again, year after year, they're sort of this sleeper team. Still definitely possible, but there are some real concerns that are sticking out with the Heat as things currently stand. But on the Sixers side of this, I was very impressed with the stretch that Philly played without Joel Embiid in the fourth quarter. He was checked out from 7:30 to 3:30, just about. And Philly was down 6 when he left the game. By the time he came back, they were up by 1. And it was in large part due to Tyrese Maxey, of course, who was tremendous in this game, scored 37 points, came just 1 rebound shy of a triple-double. But Kelly Oubre has also been playing some really good minutes for Philly lately on both ends of the floor. And I just talked about him the other day as well. Sometimes he's this irrational confidence guy that goes the no, yes shots, where he's fearless. And I feel like Nick Nurse has really taken a liking to him. Last night he played 41 minutes in the game, tied with Tyrese Maxey for the most by any 76er. And it was really impressive, I thought, the way that Philly was able to hold themselves together. When Embiid checked out around that 7:30 mark, he was at 29 minutes. That was the same number of minutes he played in his first game when the 76ers had him return against the Oklahoma City Thunder earlier this week. But they end up bringing him back, and he wasn't ultimately, the number one impact guy. It was a lot of Tyrese Maxey down the stretch. But again, I think that that's almost more of a positive for Philly than anything if you look at it from a certain angle, that the 76ers are, they looked so terrible, obviously, in those months where Embiid was out. And he's still a big deal, even when he's not doing the scoring. His presence alone is a difference maker for this Philadelphia team. But ultimately, when you look at the situation of all of this, they don't seem to need the 35 points per game version of Embiid that we were seeing in the first half of this season. But diving into how Embiid looked in this game in particular, he came out hot, 21 points in the first half, but definitely, again, in the second half of this game, sort of similar to what we saw against the Thunder earlier this week, was that conditioning is definitely an issue with him right now. He ended up scoring 8 points in the third quarter and then went scoreless in the fourth, was 3 of 9 from the field in the second half as a whole, and just didn't look all that aggressive. Now, to be fair, the Heat were running their zone coverage, and when Embiid was getting the ball at the free throw line, he had multiple defenders in his space, so he, at least this time, passing out of these types of double teams, didn't have the 6 turnovers that he had against Oklahoma City. And also, to his credit, Bam Adebayo is a very tough defender to try and work through, and it seemed like Embiid just didn't really have any interest in pushing it from that perspective. But he's very clearly still working himself into shape here. Like I talked about the other day, it's obviously better for the 76ers if they can steal that 6th seed and avoid the play-in tournament. But the number one thing for him here is just making sure that he's as healthy as possible headed into these playoffs, and having him push himself to the limits in a regular season game that, yes, again, obviously nice to have this type of a win, but it is not the end-all be-all for their season. And I'm just curious whether or not we're going to be able to see the full version of him. They have 5 games left in the season. How much is going to change from now to then? We're just outside 2 weeks from the official start of the playoffs. Play-in tournaments start on the 17th, I believe. So I'm going to need to see a lot of improvement necessarily if they want to compete with Boston or Milwaukee. Again, not that I think that either of those teams are unbeatable, especially the Bucks, and the 76ers can be a tough matchup, but it's just going to be very interesting to see what version of Embiid we get down the stretch of the season. I also wanted to touch on the Rockets-Warriors last night, where of course, it was a storyline for a bit there, how the Rockets had won 10 straight games, and they were making a push at the Warriors for that final play-in spot. They played a couple games this past week that sort of looked like it was going to kill their chances of that. They lost to the Mavericks and Timberwolves headed into this game, and ultimately the Warriors just took it to them in this one. Really wasn't all that close. And now it's a 4-game difference between the Warriors and the Rockets, and it seems like the Rockets' season is sort of just about over. I do want to give them credit for the way that they were able to play down the stretch of this season. Very impressive, and there's a lot to build on there. But the youth is absolutely a big-time thing with them. You look at their away record this season, 9-28. That's just not good enough to be a postseason team. And if they had even made the play-in tournament, they were going to have to go into the likes of possibly in LA. And it just didn't seem like they were necessarily in a good position regardless. But that being said, this season wasn't supposed to be their year making the playoffs, and they took a lot of strides in the right direction, really correcting their defense under their new head coach, Ime Udoka. So good for them on that. Elsewhere in the league last night, I guess I would also just sort of point to the Nuggets-Clippers game that took place late last night. It was a primetime game on TNT. There was no Kawhi, no Jamal Murray. So no Kawhi. I guess it sort of takes away from the point I'm about to make, but this was a little bit looking like a get-right game where it's a shorthanded Nuggets team. We've seen how different that they've looked without Jamal Murray in this recent stretch. I believe he missed his 7th straight game possibly last night, dealing with an injury. But again, I feel like it's more precautionary than anything. But James Harden had been going through a big-time slump headed into this game, and the Clippers do win it. Ends up being a close one. They win 102-100. This was a really weird game. Now, on the Harden note, he got himself going in the second quarter, showed some flashes of promise there, but still finished the night just 6 of 23 from the field, 2 of 13 from 3. That still is not looking great, and this is, a situation this year in LA where playoff Harden is absolutely a narrative that has sort of surrounded him for a handful of years now, which is to some level fair. But when you look at where Philly was last year with Harden, they were really reliant on him in that role, assuming that the Clippers are fully healthy, which, still is never necessarily a given with them. Harden is the third option for them, so Still not necessarily, quite as reliant on Harden to be the go-to guy in the playoffs, and they can overcome to some level them being him not performing at the level that maybe hope from him. But this is still a team that headed into last night was 500 over their last 24 or so games, and defensively since the All-Star break have looked really bad. And again, no Kawhi in this game, so it's hard to say this was a total get-right game for LA, but it did feel like it was going to be that way a little bit. Now, Paul George was excellent in this one. He seems to sort of be coming into his own. They had that game against the 76ers a couple weeks ago where he started out in the first half really struggling, but then down the stretch of that game, making plays on both ends. I do feel like he's still one of the more underappreciated players of, you can make an argument, his generation. I've always been a big fan of Paul George going back to his days in Indy prior to that injury, but like I said, this was a very weird game where the refs were pretty bad on both ends. Mike Malone ended up getting tossed because of some of the officiating that had him with a hot head, and it was clear that they were missing both Malone and Jamal Murray at the end, where the Nuggets got a stop on defense with about 8 seconds left, and they clearly had very little idea what they were doing. Peyton Watson grabbed the rebound. He started just dribbling the ball up the court and slowly dribbling the ball up the court, then passed it to Jokic. Their assistant, Adelman, I believe his name is, he ends up calling a timeout, but they burn 3 seconds there because of the fact that they dribbled the ball up the court the way that they did. They couldn't get the ball advanced to the half court, and ultimately Jokic had to just chuck up a ridiculous shot, which granted, we've seen him make some crazy shots in the past, but just not a good look whatsoever. But again, for the Nuggets, doesn't really matter. It was just clear they were missing their head coach and their star ball handler, but not a super convincing game from LA still. And again, I know I keep saying it, no Kawhi makes a difference here, but was just hoping to see a higher level of performance, I think. Specifically, you got to look at that Harden situation and be at least a little bit concerned about it. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other end, going to be sort of giving some final details here on the Stephon Diggs deal, as that was one of the biggest headlines of the week, of course, and we have some details that have come out over the past 24 hours. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our final segment of the day. Going to be talking some updates on the Stephon Diggs deal. For those of you who didn't happen to catch any of it through the week, Stephon Diggs, the star receiver for the Buffalo Bills, was traded to the Houston Texans earlier this week on Wednesday. The Texans traded a 2025 second-round pick that is initially from the Minnesota Vikings in exchange for Diggs and a 2024 sixth-rounder and a 2025 fifth-rounder. So that is obviously sort of the baseline of this. Texans trying to capitalize on the fact that they have so many key players for their organization on rookie contracts, and they have the extra space. We've talked in length this week about the spending that they've been able to do outside of the lines during free agency, adding a bunch to their defense, adding Joe Mixon as a potential, in my opinion, an upgrade in the run game from last year as well. But had some interesting details come out over the past 24 hours. The Texans are going to be voiding the final 3 years of Diggs' contract. They took some guaranteed money that was supposed to be down the road, somewhere around $3 million, and added it to his contract for this season. So this becomes an expiring deal for Diggs, who is probably looking to cash out on one last big-time payday. He was under contract for the next few years, of course, and was going to be getting money, but a lot less of it guaranteed. And now he has a chance to really establish himself again after, to some degree, a down season last year where he had his least amount of yards since 2019 and was just not the same level of effective as we've seen from him in the past. But Diggs is currently 30 years old, and he's going to, again, probably try and chase that one last big-time contract. Now, as far as where I think he's going to end up, not going to dive into all that too much just yet. We still have a full season to play with him. I don't think he's going to be back with Houston after this year. I feel like they're probably going to want to have that cap availability in the next 3 years or so when they do have to pay the likes of CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. Nico Collins is also entering the final year of his contract. Diggs is, should be still the better player than Nico Collins, but Collins has the longer term upside. So again, we'll see how all of that works out. But again, this is Diggs getting a chance to sort of play hungrier, which I feel like can be a little bit debated as to what that means, because Diggs is somebody who was very unhappy with the way that the Bills used him this past year. As we know, with wide receivers, oftentimes it's a very, statistic heavy position, which I don't think is always fair necessarily in terms of the base stats. I would just prefer to see Diggs be bought into an organization and the process of all of it, where the Bills' offense probably to some degree was even better last year down the stretch when they weren't trying to force feed him every time. But I mean, the tension between him and the Bills went back to at least last offseason, coming out of their divisional loss against the Bengals. And that was sort of, reestablished by the fact that they are going to pay, the Bills that is, are going to pay $31 million in dead money, which is the largest hit for a non-quarterback in history in terms of dead cap. So really does tell you how badly they wanted to move on from him. I guess it is being reported that Diggs was allowed to seek a trade partner to sort of make this type of deal work. So seems like Diggs was also in on that note, on the whole idea of him getting a shorter term contract from the Texans, wiping out those final years. And he seems to be, wanting to be on this expiring deal. Again, I do feel like the level of buy-in from an organizational standpoint is going to be a big time subplot with the Texans this season, because I definitely don't want to, trash him necessarily. He has diva tendencies, you can say that. I don't want to categorize him necessarily as a diva, his personality wise, because I've never met the man and that would be a little bit unfair to do so. But we hasn't had the cleanest of endings in his past 2 stops. Now, the Minnesota deal wasn't all that big of a, situation at the time, but we just know the type of player that Diggs is. He's very passionate, of course, and he has the utmost confidence in himself, which he should, for good reason. But is he going to be able to sort of hone that into a Texans team that is trying to capitalize on a window here, just as the Bills were when Diggs first arrived in Buffalo, and they were trying to sort of do a similar situation where they had a quarterback that was, consensus top 5 guy in the league, or at least perceived to be that way at the time, with Josh Allen. And they were trying to maximize on that window where he was on a rookie contract. And now that's what the Texans are attempting to do with CJ Stroud, which is definitely the right decision in my eyes, because it seems like they are close enough that, they can be real competitors in the playoffs. Am I going to pick them over the Chiefs? No, I'm not, pretty definitively, but who knows also. I think that there's no reason to not try at this point, and the Texans are doing so, and it's absolutely the right decision. How is Diggs going to respond to, being in an offense that has, I would argue, way more talent than the Bills' skill positions last year did, where it was Diggs, it was Gabe Davis, who was dealing with some injuries. Khalil Shakir was a nice development over the course of the year. I don't know. I mean, the Bills actually, as I'm talking through this in real time, the Bills were a good offense last year as well, so I don't totally want to discredit them. But lots of weapons here in Houston with Nico Collins, who it seems like Stroud has an excellent rapport with. If you look red zone targets and on third down attempts, it seemed like he was always finding Nico Collins, and it was always succeeding. So in a good way, of course, but him, Tank Dell, who showed a lot of flashes in his rookie season, Dalton Schultz was a nice addition as well, and now they're bringing in Joe Mixon to try and help with the run game. I believe Dameon Pierce is still on the roster as well. Not that I expect him to be a massive contributor this season, but also somebody who had a tremendous rookie season and just disappeared last year, with a better offensive line and passing game. Still something that makes no sense to me up to this point, but we'll see. But lots of mouths to feed in that situation. Nico Collins, again, also going to be on the final year of his current contract. Maybe the Texans work out something with him for an extension wise, but this is a big time inflection point for Diggs to sort of prove himself. What do you want to be in the NFL as things currently stand? Do you want to just be a high paid player, or do you want to be a real difference maker on a playoff team? And I do believe that Diggs has legitimate competitive fire. As corny as it sort of got, he started this whole trend, basically, of when he stood on the field watching the Kansas City Chiefs AFC Championship celebration and standing in the confetti and the trophy ceremony and all of that. Almost turned into this ridiculous trend that happened a little bit. But, it was because at the time he legitimately was hungry. He wanted to experience that, so he never felt it again. And unfortunately, with the Bills, it just never played out again in a positive way necessarily from that point on. But I do think that Diggs really genuinely cares about trying to put together the best possible season, and not just for himself, but to actually have some postseason success. And we will see how that all plays out. I do also want to sort of go back to that idea of the fact that the Bills allowed Diggs to seek a trade partner. It was also reported that the one team that he was not allowed to talk to was the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that there may have been some level of communication from the two parties, and the Bills shut that down for good reason to not give Diggs to the Chiefs, because that would have been, there was just no way that was going to happen. I know that the Bills don't necessarily seem like favorites like they once were to win the Super Bowl, but they still believe that with Josh Allen and with the infrastructure they have, they can be at least playoff competitive, be searching for a division title, and what I forget what I was watching. I think it was something on ESPN calling. Somebody got made fun of for saying that the AFC East is open. I sort of do feel that it is. Where I think that the Bills got worse, I think that the Dolphins got worse, and the Jets got better. And those three teams, any one of them can come away with the division title. Let us know in the comment section who you have winning that division. But I feel like there's still, a lot up in the air with that division. And the Bills, they were just never going to trade Diggs to the Chiefs in that instance, where it feels like it would have been, I wouldn't say a death sentence necessarily, because again, we'll see how long Diggs is still going to have the level of play that he has showed that he clearly can, as recent as a couple seasons ago in 2022, where he had 1,400 yards. So I definitely would not say that he's washed, but something needed to change there in Buffalo. He heads out. The Bills save some money ultimately in the long run. Not ideal eating all of that dead money this coming season, but sometimes that's just the cost of, we just saw Russell Wilson and the amount of money that the Broncos are going to be paying him to not be there in these next 2 seasons. So sometimes you just need to, pay the price to make the change happen. And who knows? They obviously don't get a first round pick, but I don't think that any team was going to give up a first round pick for Diggs. And that second rounder could be semi-valuable next year. We will see. Like I talked about this past week, they are going to need to capitalize on some of these draft opportunities to actually, pull themselves back into a competitive environment headed forward here. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have on that. We do have a comment before we head out here from Kirito MVP. Warriors new 5 with Curry, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, Trace Jackson Davis are 10th offensively and 3rd defensively in the Warriors' old core, with Curry, Pajemski, Wiggins, Kuminga, and Green are 7th offensively, 15th defensively. What 5 will Steve Kerr keep? That's a good question. We saw last night the fact that Klay Thompson can still absolutely be a contributor. Let me pull up the numbers right now, but he had a very efficient night last night. And really, since he's sort of settled into this bench role, it seems like more and more often we're seeing him be able to give good offensive minutes. But that being said, the defense just is not at the level that it was when he was, the All-NBA caliber player. I actually don't know if he was ever selected to an All-NBA team, but of course we all know how good and valuable Klay was during those years, which is why he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He didn't make an All-NBA, which I guess isn't all too shocking necessarily, but, he did make a third team once. 2 times, actually. So, yeah, I think that ultimately, I don't think Klay is going to be in the starting 5 for them. And Kirito comments, if Kuminga doesn't want to come off the bench, truthfully, I don't think he should come off the bench, and I don't think that he would take to that kindly. If your plan is to have Kuminga come off the bench, I feel like you're better off trading him and trying to make one of those deals. I think that he has too much value to make just a bench scorer. The raw talent even headed back to when he was coming into the G League Ignite. He was seen as a raw prospect that had plenty of talent, and now he's showing that this season. The whole league has seen that. Moving him back to the bench, I don't think that he would take it lightly, and he would probably, like he called out Kerr to the media earlier this year, he would do the same thing, and I think that would be a mess. So in terms of Kuminga specifically, I feel like he's got to be your starter or you got to move him. And, Wiggins has been playing some real good minutes for them lately. His efficiency on offense, specifically from the 3-point line, has seen an increase since the beginning of March, and we're seeing him be bought back in on defense more and more as time comes here. Ultimately, it's hard to sort of balance this two timelines situation that the Warriors have been walking that line of these past couple years where they've been trying to, develop the youth talent while also being championship competitive. And ultimately, you look, they win the 2022 finals, but they did so in large part with that second timeline really taking a back seat. James Wiseman never saw the court for them. Kuminga rarely got minutes during that finals run, and same with Moody as well. Warriors owner loved Kuminga, but even said Trayce Jackson-Davis is what they really needed. So I do like Trayce Jackson-Davis a lot. He was a massive pickup for them, but you let me know, do you see him being, a dominant big man in the Western Conference in these final years of Curry's prime? Because I don't necessarily, and I really like him as a player, and he's a key contributor. He should be on the team, but I think you're going to need more size in the West as things currently stand than just banking on Trayce Jackson-Davis than you currently have. I feel like, again, the name that I really like sort of playing the experiment with is if they could add a Jarrett Allen to the team, just a real defensive anchor. Draymond, for as good of a defender as he is, it's kind of hard to rely on him consistently at this point in his career, and just having an anchor like that, can be a massive deal for them. Now, Jackson Davis, it's tough because he can definitely start on a handful of lineups right now in the NBA, but I don't see him, as things currently stand, as a starter on a finals winning team. So I feel like banking your whole future on that is a little bit of a risky move. Again, if this was on a different situation where you didn't have the likes of Steph Curry playing the level of basketball that he currently is, I would definitely be more prone to sort of playing it out and seeing how things work out. But I do think that they're a little bit on a time crunch here. They have to be definitive with choosing the direction they want to go with. Are they developing talent long term, or are they competing now? Truthfully, they can do either option depending on how they want to pivot here, because they have enough players on both ends of that spectrum that can do something in that role. With Podziemski and Kuminga, and Moody's been getting some more minutes lately. I've been a Moody guy all this time, and now we're finally seeing him get some more minutes as well. I know that, he wasn't even mentioned in your top 5 there, but playing some nice bench minutes, giving some good defensive pressure. I feel like if he is allowed to have a little bit of a longer leash, he still can succeed in the league here. But again, that's the thing, is it's hard to sort of roll out these guys for heavy minutes when they're young and making mistakes if you're trying to be a championship competitive team. The Warriors are one of the most expensive payrolls in the entire league right now, and they're sitting as the 10 seed and are going to have to win multiple play-in games to even make the playoffs. That's not good enough when you're in that luxury tax threshold and you're not having the regular season success to... And, if they come out of the play-in tournament and make a finals run, which I will confidently say that they don't, then I'm wrong in this situation. I just don't see that being the case, and they're going to have to make some definitive decisions to pick a direction in which they want to go. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back on Monday. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the Final 4 games on both the men's and women's side. We will be, of course, diving into all of that on Monday, so we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.